With Salah and Son both off at the AFCON and the Asia Cup over the next few weeks, I've picked out the 10 best replacements in midfield to bring into your FPL side, including 5 players who are under 5% ownership at the moment. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 replacements for Salah and Son, who are both going off to international tournaments over the next few weeks. They're obviously not the only ones going, so do check out if you've got any AFCON or Asia Cup representatives in your lineup. The other ones that come to mind are Kudus at West Ham, Mitoma if he was back from injury, Hwang Hee-chan as well at Wolves. There are a few in and out of our FPL side, so do watch out for the next few weeks. So, especially with midfielders in mind, let's take a look at the top 10 replacements at the moment. And the first one, let's get the obvious one out of the way. Jarrod Bowen is going to be very high in a lot of people's minds at the moment. Obviously, the data and the return so far this season has been very, very good. And of course, he's easy to get to from both Son and Salah at just 8 million. His ownership is getting higher, so he will probably get to about 40, maybe even 50%, because he is probably the most obvious choice of the bunch today. But I would urge possibly a little bit of caution. Now, obviously, he'll still be a really good pick. He's going to be high in my consideration as well, and it's obvious why so many people will be going there. However, West Ham look like they're going to be without Paquetá for a little while, and as I already mentioned, Mohamed Kudus is going off to the AFCON as well. So their creative outlets are going to be somewhat diminished over the next few weeks, and maybe that hampers Jarrod Bowen and affects the amount of returns he might get. Nevertheless, he's still going to tick over. He's still a fantastic option. The data and the goals are looking really strong at the moment, so I'd put absolutely nobody off going for Jarrod Bowen, and he is probably the most obvious option out there at the moment. So the next player that's going to be very interesting to FPL managers is Phil Foden. Now, obviously, he got a 12-point haul in game week 20, so he's going to take the limelight at the moment, and he will be one of the most popular transfers in this game week. Now, it is important to mention that the underlying attacking data so far this season is just a smidge under 0.5 XGI, per 90, that is. However, in the last 2 game weeks, it's been significantly better, mainly because he's moved to that CAM role, that number 10 role in behind the striker. Now, if he continues in that role, he's going to be one of the most valuable players in the game because he always looks electric there. Man City always produce a lot of chances there, and he seems to be the central focal point of the way Man City build up their attacks. Now, it is worth noting, though, that if Erling Haaland does come back in game week 21 or in game week 22, which either could be likely at this point, then Julian Alvarez will probably move away from that central striker slot, and he'll probably want to be contesting those minutes in that cam role with Phil Foden. Also, KDB is going to be back pretty soon as well, if not in game week 21 itself, and he likes to play there too. So Foden might not necessarily keep playing in that CM role where he's been really effective recently, but regardless, the attacking data is still pretty decent. The fixtures over the next 3 or 4, which is probably the spread that we're looking at for a pick like this. If Salah and Son both go deep in the competition, they're probably out until game week 24, if not game week 25. So these next 4 games are going to be really important. Phil Foden, after that Newcastle game especially, those are 3 really good games next up: Burnley, Brentford and Everton. So Man City assets will be high in mind, and Phil Foden at this price as well, especially if he can stay in the cam role, is going to be very, very valuable. Another player I'm really tempted by at Man City, as I mentioned in the previous section, is Kevin De Bruyne. Now, he has been out pretty much all season long, so this would be a massive gamble because he's coming back from a pretty long injury layoff. However, looking at the 22-23 data on screen below, there are some ridiculously good underlying numbers there. And obviously, as we all know, he's an elite attacking player, not just for Man City, but in global football. So 25 attacking returns last season alone. Every single season, he's in and around the 200-point club as it stands at the moment. And obviously, if he's feeding into Erling Haaland, those chances are going to be probably taken more often than not by the striker. So Kevin De Bruyne, if he can get back into that starting lineup quickly after a long injury layoff, then I think he will be incredibly good as a pick for the next few weeks. The price doesn't really matter because we're going to want a route back to Salah or Son in the next few weeks anyway. So at 10.2 million, it's kind of irrelevant what the price is because you're downgrading that Salah position anyway. So you're going to have a fair bit of money left in your bank unless you really want to spread it around your 11. Now, Kevin De Bruyne, as I mentioned, is very, very differential with good reason because it is a risk, but if maybe you can hold off one of those transfers one game week, i.e. game week 21, and see him get some minutes against Newcastle, then he runs into that fixture run of Burnley, Brentford, Everton. And if he's back in the starting lineup by game week 22, I think he will be a fantastic differential to help you rise up the ranks really quickly, where other people are probably going to be a little bit more cautious because he has been out for quite a while. Speaking of long injury layoffs, and Diogo Jota is another player that I'm really interested in over the coming game weeks. Now, Mo Salah obviously going off to AFCON leaves another spot in that front three for Liverpool, and Jota getting minutes off the bench in the previous game week, in game week 19 that is. They still haven't played that game week 20 fixture at time of recording, so obviously asterisks apply. If he manages to get himself injured in game week 20, then this kind of goes out the window. In the meantime though, as long as he doesn't get injured, he has come back from a pretty long injury layoff, but whenever he's in the squad, whenever he's in the lineup, he gets returns. That 0.41 XGI per 90 is very, very good for what is a classified midfielder in FPL. He plays out of position. We know he's going to be part of that front three, just like Mo Salah is. And if Mo Salah is out for those weeks and Jota is fully fit, I'd expect him to be one of the key attacking forces at Liverpool during that time. And again, 7.7 million, he's very easy to get to. And if you want that Liverpool coverage and you're not tempted by the likes of Darwin, which I think a lot of us are pretty sick of anyway, then Diogo Jota is a much more lethal finisher. His data's really good as well. So especially with the next 4 game weeks in mind, Bournemouth in 21, Chelsea at home, I wouldn't be too scared of either. Arsenal away is definitely the toughest one in there, but then Burnley in game week 24. If Salah's still not back by that point, Jota will still be great value for money. So again, very, very differential, 1.3% ownership. So if you go for a player like this and he bangs, then you are going to have a great time of it over the time when Salah and Son are off on international duty. Another player that was really unfortunate not to start the season due to injury was Elise. Now, he's come back for a bit longer now. He's been back for 3 or 4 game weeks, and the data and the returns since he's been back, as well as the eye test, by the way, he's been passing all of that with flying colours. He's been absolutely phenomenal for Palace since coming back in. And I think the fact that he scored 2 goals in game week 20 is a bit annoying actually, because he probably won't stay as differential as he would have done otherwise, but the data is still absolutely ridiculous. 0.70 XGI per 90 is phenomenal. That is elite level numbers, and if he can keep that up, or even if he dips a little bit, he's still going to be great value for money at under 6 million. So again, very, very differential, 1.4% owned. That I do expect to rise a little bit, and I would say 2 of the next 4 fixtures are absolutely ideal. Sheffield United and then Brighton, even though it's yellow on the ticker, they concede every single week. So I'd be very surprised if Elise didn't have a bit of joy in that game in particular. Arsenal away from home, obviously on paper not ideal, but Arsenal have been stuttering a little bit recently. And then Chelsea at home in game week 24, you might have had to sell him by that point anyway to get back to someone like Son or Salah if they exit their international tournaments early. But Chelsea at home isn't really that bad either. I wouldn't be massively worried about any of those. And again, like I said, he's ultra differential, but the data is that of a player that should be almost a template pick. 0.70. It is a short sample size, but we know how good he is. We know that if you watch him, with 490 minutes, the eye test, he passes every single time. So I would have no hesitation in backing Michael Elise over the next few weeks. Richarlison is a player that just sneaks in over that 5% differential category that I mentioned at the start. So even though he's not technically under 5% owned and an ultra differential, he's still very, very good to have in your FPL teams if he's returning. He's a player that I think around my rank is about 10% effective ownership, which means that in the higher ranks, he's a little bit higher owned than this, but still you're getting the benefit of 90+% of his points at the moment. And of course, he scored earlier today in that Bournemouth clash. He's gotten 6 goals this season already, despite being injured for a bit of it, and 9 returns overall. So he is a player that I expect to really step up and help Spurs to victory in the next few game weeks with Son going away. So It is worth noting that without Son in that lineup, they probably won't be quite as creative. He probably won't get quite as many chances, but he's still classified as a midfielder. He's still very, very cheap at 6.8 million. And he's playing out of position up front in that centre forward role at the moment. And all of the chances are falling to him at the moment. That 0.5 XG per 90, again, for someone who's classified as a midfielder, is absolutely ludicrous. So like the others I've mentioned, he might not be quite as differential, but if you back him to return well over the next few game weeks, you're going to go flying up the ranks. And the fixtures, again, none of which would scare me whatsoever, especially in the next 5. I think he's a good hold for those 5. And to be honest, you might even be able to hold him after that if he keeps playing in centre forward. If Tottenham keep scoring the amount of goals they are doing, you might want to even hold on to him after this little run of fixtures is over. Now, Martin Ødegaard might not be quite so popular after most of us have seen what Arsenal did today against Fulham. They didn't really create a lot. Ødegaard was all right in the game, but again, he didn't really find himself creating a lot of chances or on the end of much. But the data so far this season has been quite promising. He's going along at about 0.5 XGI per 90. He's still fairly differential. I think a lot of that 15% ownership are largely dead teams. I think he's not too high owned at all in the top ranks. So again, fairly differential, and he's easy enough to get to like any player I'm mentioning today if you're going to move away from Salah or Son. Now, I think the fact that he blanked in game week 20 and Arsenal didn't impress, especially in the last couple of weeks, means that Ødegaard will probably be overlooked a little bit, but I still expect him to be a really good value pick for the next few game weeks whilst we're losing 2 premium options. Crystal Palace at home, Nottingham Forest away, then Liverpool at home is the difficult one in that bunch. But generally speaking, Arsenal will be competitive in all of those games. Ødegaard is one of the key chief creators, and he's arriving in the box late. He's arriving at the edge of the box late for those cutbacks from Saka, from Martinelli, and he is getting quite a few shots away this season at, if not as good a rate as last season, very, very close. So I'd still back Ødegaard to do very well. 8 attacking returns is probably slightly underperforming so far, but I still back him to do very, very well over the next few game weeks, and I'd have no hesitation in recommending him as another option. If you're looking for someone who's not only differential, but also extremely cheap and maybe even a perfect 8th attacker in your lineup, then look no further than Garnacho. Still under 5% owned, which is crazy considering how he's been performing recently and the fact that whenever a Man United asset does well, they tend to get really quickly transferred in because there are just so many Man United fans globally as well. So I'd expect him not to stay differential for long considering the way he's performing recently. At 4.8 million to have a Man United asset, even if they're stuttering a little bit, that is starting week in, week out and getting 80 plus minutes every single week in an attacking position and likely to keep scoring goals, I think that is absolute gold dust. So if you want to mix up your starting 11, maybe get an 8 strong attacking force and maybe switch to a 3-4-3, and have him as your 8th attacker, that 5th midfielder, or if you just back him to be good enough value for money that actually he could be in your starting lineup week in, week out, then Garnacho could be a really good transfer in. Tottenham at home, we know how many goals Tottenham can see. We know that they play full throttle football, but they leave chances in behind. Then Wolves, then West Ham, then Aston Villa, none of which I'd be scared of at all either. And then Luton game week 25. He's a player that if you buy him in for the likes of Son or Salah, then maybe you hold on to him after they come back and you use another player in your midfield to sell to get back to Salah and Son, whilst keeping Garnacho as that maybe that first bench option as that 5th midfielder. And then you can have 3 strikers as well, and you can have a bit of rotation in your lineup every single week. Again, because he's so cheap, he's very easy to get to. His data isn't quite as good as some of the other options I'm looking at today, but his price makes it extremely tempting to go for Garnacho. And again, I'd be pretty hot on bringing him in over the next few game weeks. Leon Bailey is having the best season he's ever had in the Premier League so far, all thanks to Unai Emery, and I expect that to continue over the next few game weeks. in the past, his data has always been fantastic. He's always been one of the top players in terms of XGI per 90 for Aston Villa and across the league in general, by the way, since he signed. The problem with Bailey was always whether or not he'd actually get the minutes, whether or not he'd start the matches and play 90. But Emery seems to have a lot more faith in him than previous managers have, and he's definitely getting the best out of him at the moment as well. 11 attacking returns this season already, and with 2 of the next 3 fixtures away at Everton and Sheffield United, I think, again, he's a really good budget enabler and a player that maybe, if you can stretch the budget, could be that perfect 8th attacker as well. Now, the data, it's important to mention, is not 8th attacker like at all. He is premium attacking data at the moment. That 0.64 XGI per 90 is amongst some of the best in the league right now. So again, disregard the price from your thinking. This is a player that's getting points, he's getting returns, and the data suggests that that should continue. Again, he's ultra differential, under 5% owned, and to be honest, all of the next 5 fixtures I'd back him to do well in. That Newcastle at home game is undoubtedly the hardest one there, but we know how much Newcastle have struggled away from home recently. So again, Aston Villa at home have one of the best records in world football at the moment at home. So again, I'd expect him to do well even against the hardest teams, and Newcastle are very much one of those, even if they're playing away from home. So Bailey, again, another player I'd be very interested in bringing in over the next few weeks, and he's ultra cheap. So let's wrap it up with a bit of a weird one, and maybe I'm cheating slightly because Trent obviously isn't a midfielder, but maybe there's an argument to suggest that if you're moving funds away from Salah, away from Son, maybe spreading those funds and bolstering your defence, if you've not already got Trent in situ, then maybe this is the perfect opportunity to do so, and perhaps the best replacement for those 2 players who are very explosive, very reliable picks isn't actually a midfielder at all. It's bringing in another midfielder and then also Trent, because you've got so much money saved up from doing so. Yes, it makes it maybe slightly harder to get back to them in a few game weeks' time, but the rate at which Trent is returning at the moment makes him a very easy pickup, and one that would convince probably a lot of managers, including myself, to go there despite the price. Now, he is 25.9% owned. He's definitely not differential at this point, but again, maybe that's an argument to just get him in and make sure that you're covered off, because I do expect him to do really well even without Salah in the lineup for the next 4 game weeks. We've already discussed the fixtures for Liverpool. The data is getting better week in, week out, and he's the joint top bonus point scorer so far this season, which means if Liverpool keep a clean sheet, if he even gets 1 attacking return without the clean sheet, he's very likely to get full bonus points, or at least 1 or 2, which makes him an absolutely elite attacking option, even without being a midfielder or an attacker. So 97 points this season already, and that's without game week 20 taken into account as well. We don't know what's going to happen in that game because I'm recording before that game goes ahead tomorrow. So who knows, he could even be past 100 points by tomorrow. So overall, I think Trent, even though he's not technically a replacement, using the money from either Son or Salah and bolstering your defence by bringing in Trent Alexander-Arnold could be a really key move to make sure you keep churning out the points with that money over the next few game weeks. So there you have it, 10 key replacements for the likes of Salah or Son, or any other players that are going off to AFCON or the Asia Cup over the next few game weeks. Now, as always, if you want to leave a comment below with any player that I've forgotten to mention today, then please do so. To be honest, I was really struggling to keep this to just 10 players today, so there are plenty of other players that I'd love to have a look at, and if you want to comment any of them in the comments below, then please feel free to do so. As well, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. It really does help me out, and I wish all of you a very happy new year from me, and I look forward to catching up with you again as we look at my team selection ahead of game week 21 in the next week.